the end of these slides.
Spread out. Right. We'll definitely want to see some things will lend themselves to being spread out, and some are going to have to stay with one person.
Hi, all. If we can remember to put ourselves on mute, that'd be great. Thank you.
We have a membership survey this month, and we would like everybody, members and non-members, to fill it out. That's going to help us to be a better organization for everybody. And the last announcement is about the Young Member Forum, that not everybody's aware of this group. I mean, it's part of the Seattle section for engineers under the age of 35, and they provide networking, professional development, K-12, and university outreach. And they're having a happy hour on October 27 from 6 to 7:30 p.m. And it's going to be about Halloween. This is a really fun group to be and enrich your professional life outside of your work. And it's geared towards anybody that graduated and is less than 35. And that's all I have. This is my email.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Thank you, Homero. So now we're excited to introduce Suzanna Smith, who's with Habitat Projects, who is the Habitat Projects coordinator for WRI 9. Just a few reminders before she takes control is please mute your microphone so we aren't bugging her. But feel free to turn on your camera and your microphone if you want to ask a question, or use the chat box for technical issues and/or questions. And this meeting is being recorded, and we can give it out at the end. And with that, Suzanna, I will let you take control.
Hi, everyone. I'm going to try and share my screen as flawlessly as possible. Let me get this loaded up here. Okay. How is that looking? Is that a full screen?
We're looking at your PowerPoint in smaller version.
Okay. Let's try once again.
You lost your screen, Suzanne.
Here we go. That should be it.
Yep, that's
there you go.
Wonderful. We did work through that yesterday, and still takes a little time. So thank you so much for having me today. I really appreciate this opportunity to just share a little bit about my work. I'm going to go ahead and take my video off because I just find that it's easier to have bandwidth without my video. So I'll join you again once I'm done with my presentation. So like Michelle said, I'm Suzanna Smith. I coordinate the Habitat Projects for WRI 9. And I really appreciate this opportunity to talk with you more about that work, and thank you for your interest. As you know, the Green Duwamish winds through one of the most populated, diverse, wealthy regions in the Puget Sound, and it sets up a really complicated and challenging backdrop to recover salmon and restore salmon habitat. Same complications that make any public works project, any road, any bridge, any pipe, a pretty big challenge. And I'd also say that it's just really full of opportunity for innovation and some creative solutions. So last year, American Rivers named the Green Duwamish #4 on America's most threatened river We face issues like fish passage, where 40% of our river habitat is blocked at the Howard Hanson Dam. We have massive loss of estuary and floodplain development and stormwater and legacy pollution issues. Because of those challenges, we see Chinook return rates that are significantly lower in those contaminated estuaries like the Duwamish. PCB tissue contamination levels are causing adverse health impacts. Fish are experiencing sublethal and lethal water temperatures. Those are projected to get worse. And the middle green is density independent, indicating that productivity is constrained by rearing habitat limitations in the middle and lower green. Our fry migrants in the Duwamish are not returning as adults. Throughout my talk, I encourage you to think about your projects and your work and ask yourself, what does it take to go that extra step and connect with salmon interests? Make your project more fish friendly and contribute to salmon recovery in your local watershed. And where might you have those opportunities? I'd argue that good public works projects can both protect people and infrastructure and the environment. And in fact, those fish friendly projects often turn out to be less costly. They're better for people, better for infrastructure than simply implementing the same traditional fixes again and again that have potentially negative consequences and need to be constantly repaired, like channel straightening or bank armoring. It pushes the problem downstream and leads to downstream flooding and erosion. Levees just simply aren't as good at slowing floodwaters down as a sinuous river. So I'm hoping in some small way to sort of lodge this info into your mind. So next time you're working on a project in this watershed or really in any watershed, you know how to take that next step, reach out to your lead entity in your area, share your designs, ask about upstream or downstream projects and see if there's any little way that you could tweak your project to benefit fish. So I'll give you a very brief overview of the structure and status of salmon recovery in Washington State, and then dive a little deeper into salmon recovery in the Green Duwamish. I'll talk through some of our main limiting factors and barriers to recovery, how we're addressing them through a collaborative, community-based approach. And then finally, the fun part, I'll show you some projects that have been accomplished over the years and some of the active projects we're working on right now. So the downward trend for Chinook is seen here starting back in 1870 at the land boom from the railroad survey. From that point forward, we really began altering the landscape in very significant ways. We dammed the rivers, we logged, we farmed, we diverted rivers to meet the needs of growing populations for water supply, started harvesting fish at unprecedented levels, and then the human population grew and wild fish were harvested, their habitat degraded, hydropower and flood dams blocked their ability to spawn. Hatchery fish were introduced in 1901, leading to increased competition for already scarce habitat and resources. In 2009, we recorded the lowest number of Chinook on record in the Green at 182 fish returning. So the RIA is the Water Resource Inventory Area. It was formalized under the WAC, authorized under the Water Resources Act in '71. They're really boundaries that serve as the administrative underpinning for agencies like the DNR, Department of Natural Resources, Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife, and Department of Ecology. RIA 9 includes the Green Duwamish River and all its tributaries. It goes all the way up into the upper reaches beyond the dam and into the headwaters. This is one of the most urban and populated watersheds in the state, next to our northward neighbors, RIA 8. In our watershed, we divide into 5 sub-watersheds, which you see here: the nearshore, Duwamish, Lower Green, Middle Green, and Upper Green. Each really have their own unique issues as far as habitat restoration goes, and I'll walk you through a little bit more of that. So like I mentioned, we're just one of 4 RIAs with boundaries within King County. As you can see here, these are the boundaries of 7, 8, 9, and just a bit of 10 overlaid by the King County boundaries. So each of these Puget Sound lead entities or RIAs have chapters that are part of a NOAA approved salmon recovery plan. And these chapters help explain our local problems and propose those science-based strategies to overcome them. So lead entities were part of the Salmon Recovery Act of '98 and really created that local infrastructure for salmon recovery statewide. In many cases, this was just making official what had already been in place. There was already a bottom-up approach to salmon recovery, and that's kind of dubbed the Washington way, and it includes this structure of lead entities. They're local, they're watershed-based organizations that help develop those salmon recovery strategies, and then recruit organizations that do habitat protection and restoration projects that help implement those strategies. Our primary role for salmon recovery is that strategy development, project implementation, and then doing adaptive management of those local recovery chapters. So working our way up the watershed, many folks forget that the Duwamish isn't just a commerce corridor, it's a portal for both adult salmon returning to spawn and young salmon that are making their way to the ocean. We faced really serious challenges with century-old legacy of pollution and poorly placed uses. Just for a reference, the rule of thumb in the Duwamish for an acquisition is about $1 million an acre, making acquiring land a really huge challenge. And even if we are able to acquire to restore, often the level of contamination makes the restoration price tag 3 to 4 times higher just to deal with the soil. And as you move up the system, you see more opportunity for restoration, lots of work in the riparian, that border between the river, the border along the river. It's important for shading and as a food source. The nearshore is also an area that's seen incredible development. All those bulkheads and reinforced bluffs limit opportunity for forage fish to spawn, limit that aquatic corridor, the migratory corridor for young salmon to use, and really starves that system out. And reiterating that retreating from the shoreline is a really good practice. It's really gaining a lot more traction in the regulatory world, as well as through the public attitude. Many homeowners are softening and naturalizing their shorelines, helping create that balance of development and habitat. I really like this graphic that shows the changes in land classification from 1875 onward. It's really shocking to see that gradual elimination of the estuary. This is the Duwamish estuary. And really over time, we've just created 2 thin channels of what used to be a really incredibly prolific estuary system that supported hundreds of species, not just salmon. So today, we're looking at the left is 1909. There's about 5,200 acres of tidal mudflats, marshes, swamps, riparian forests. Today, we see less than 1% of that historic estuary intact. So as I mentioned, WDFW studies show middle green smolt production is density independent, indicating that productivity is constrained by rearing habitat limitation in the lower and middle green. This shows the timing of Green River Chinook. It's similar to other systems. There's 2 peaks. You can see the proportion of Chinook leaving the middle green with 60% fry type, and then less than 1% yearling, and then par type about 40%. This is based on about 20 years of smolt trap data. And why that's significant is, the lower green tributaries are being used really extensively by juvenile Chinook, but based on returns, we're getting almost 0% fry type returning to the river as adults. Par and yearling have more success, but remembering back, that represents only about 40%. So generally speaking, we can anticipate to have 60% of any given year class lost as they leave the system. So, that means our most significant limiting factor for increasing Chinook populations in the green is creating spawning, rearing, foraging habitat in the middle and lower green. We just have to create more spaces for those fish to reside in the system before they're flushed out into a pretty hostile estuary and nearshore environment. So that said, salmon still depend on different parts of the system at different stages in their life. So we have to keep a steady eye on all parts of the system. And there's a lot of good work from organizations like Long Live the Kings that are researching marine survival, King Conservation District, creating a shore-friendly program to help support homeowners in the nearshore. Many, many other groups focused on aspects of the system, but primarily in the Raya, we're really thinking about creating habitat for outmigrating juveniles. So what are the challenges we face here? How are they impacting fish and fish habitat? I'd say part of the issue with the lower green of the Duwamish is the need to protect life and infrastructure while still allowing the river to function as a river. Levees serve a very important function. Without them, the whole river valley would be underwater regularly. It's the economic driver of the state. There's obviously a strong push to engineer that safety, which is completely understandable, but those levees also straighten out the river. They reduce complexity, they increase flow rates. We want sinuous, complex wooded rivers that can engage their natural floodplain, and traditional engineered solutions just don't necessarily foster that. And I know I've got a room full of engineers, so I can probably skip this next slide, but I do think it demonstrates in a really simple way what happens when you straighten out a river and what that equates to for habitat opportunity. So in channel edge length and in channel area, you see almost a halving of each of these when you straighten out the river. It's almost completely eliminating shallow water and slow water habitat for fish. All of those pieces are really important. And the most impacted subwatershed for floodplains is the lower Green River. Channel area for the lower Green was and still is 282 acres. The floodplain area was 19,600 acres, and it's now about 3,500 acres. That's an 82% loss of floodplain area. And that remaining 18% has just pretty limited connectivity due to fish passage issues and levee constructs. So based on timing of floods, fry life history types are really reliant on these floodplain habitats, and they've just seen a significant decrease over time. Stormwater is another growing threat, particularly to coho, and luckily it seems to be less so for Chinook and chum, but recent work from NOAA and Washington Stormwater Center shows that urban stormwater runoff is causing death rates so high that it's projected that some populations of wild coho are very likely to go locally extinct. It's called urban stream syndrome, and it causes pre-spawn mortality. So even before these fish are able to get up the river to spawn, they're dying. And these big rain events pump out a whole cocktail of toxins, pretty much unmitigated, into streams and tributaries that those salmon rely on. And agriculture alters the landscape significantly as well. It's obviously a tender subject. Farmers and fish have been pitted against each other for many years. We need working farms, but we need protection for the floodplains that they traditionally sit on. And it's a really tough nut to crack, but there's a lot of concentrated work being done here to bring these two interests to the table for some mutually beneficial solutions, like working buffers. I like this graphic showing whole river health, although it does eliminate the estuary part, but it's in balance with human uses. It includes protection for upland forests, revegetating riparian habitat, using those best practices for smart agriculture, protecting first, and then restoring lost wetland habitat, and ensuring flow. We'll talk a little bit more about Howard Hanson later, and then having regulations in place that really protect the quality of the water. To add to some of these local challenges, we also face those larger issues that we can only seek mitigating strategies for, including drastic changes to flow rate and timing. This graph from Climate Impacts Group shows the projected stream flow timing and rates. We run the risk of losing reds and flushing out young fish too early as the systems change and become with increased flow during those critical periods. In this system, of course, we have the dam, which is a flood control dam, but major impacts still happen downstream. And then another major issue we can only mitigate for at the local level is water temperature. It's projected that by 2080, The number of river miles exceeding thermal tolerances are projected to increase by greater than 70 miles for salmon. That means this river will no longer be hospitable for salmon unless there's something done. So the solution to increase temperatures outside of addressing, climate change globally is pretty simple. It's planting trees. There's a lot of influence through the management of the dam on water retention and release, and we advocate for that as well. But simply shading the river in the appropriate places makes a huge difference. And finally, this is everybody's challenge, and it will be, especially in this upcoming budget session, but it takes money. Money comes from people telling their elected officials that they care about salmon, they care about a functioning ecosystem. Programs like the Puget Sound Acquisition and Restoration Fund, the Estuary and Salmon Restoration Fund, and Floodplains by Design are all really critical to making salmon recovery happen in Washington State, and they are on the table every 2 years. So we have to advocate for this. And if I can, because I have the floor, if you find yourself in the position to tell your representatives, hey, thank you for prioritizing salmon recovery in Washington State. And also just remind them that it matters to you and that you want to see it prioritized in this next budget session. We are really grateful for the investment locally from King County Flood Control District. They support us at annually $3.6 million. It was just doubled from that $1.8 million in previous years, and that's a really critical source of funding to support our work. So let's talk about some of the solutions. Let's talk about some of the awesome projects that we've been able to accomplish with our partners, and then also some projects we're trying to get over the finish line in this legislative session and in the next couple of years. I'm just going to work through the watersheds and talk about completed projects, and I'll start in the near shore. So Pioneer Point began in 2009. It was a partnership with King County, the King Conservation District, and the Vashon Maury Land Trust. It was about a $5 million project, all in with acquisitions and bulkhead removal. It's at the southern tip, like the southeastern tip of Maury Island in central Puget Sound, of course. And it's right at the Pioneer Point Natural Area. It's about 8 acres of nearshore habitat with feeder bluff and mature riparian forest vegetation. This project protects about 6 shoreline properties that make up that natural area. It's over 1,500 linear feet of valuable shoreline. The feeder bluff that backs Pioneer Point is a sediment supply for beach nourishment process that extends over 7 miles downshore as longshore drift moves that bluff material along the shoreline to Point Robinson to the easternmost tip of Maury Island. There was quite a bit of bulkhead removal. And like I said, the restoration of the nearshore habitat and that longshore drift process protects important features and functions that are necessary for those aquatic corridors to be maintained. That really helps not just the green system, but nearshore is useful for all the populations that are using the Puget Sound. Duwamish Gardens was acquired in 2008. It was constructed in 2016. It's about a $4.25 million project. A little over 2-acre site with 500 feet of riverbank. It's just downstream of the East Marginal Way Bridge and the Link Light Rail Bridge. So there's new off-channel habitat there that's going to provide benefit for Chinook. There was a lot of native tree and shrub placement. There's a trail, a bench, and access. I believe you can launch your boat from here as well, your hand boat. In the river, it breaks up a 2-mile stretch where there was no other shallow water habitat. It's a really beautiful site. If you're ever strolling around in Tacoma, I would highly recommend you go down there and just check it out. Next in the lower green is the Leber side channel. It's the confluence of Mill Creek and about River Mile 24 in the city of Kent. This is a wetland floodplain off the lower Mill Creek. It's about 1.6 acres of off-channel salmon habitat below the ordinary high water mark. And then there's 5 acres that sit below the 100-year flood height. It's accessible to juvenile salmon about 125 days a year, and that's typically during their out migration period. We always place a bunch of large wood. About 40 large wood structures went in here. There's about 30,000 native plants that went in to provide that riparian habitat, and the aquatic diversity creates lots of little like micro niches for salmon and other species. There's over 50 acre-feet of new floodplain storage adjacent to the Green River from this project. You can see it there. A little better picture of when it's completed, just completed. And we'll move up to the middle green to Porter Levee off Green Valley Road. This was just completed in 2018. It's a $5.4 million project that was supported by Floodplains by Design, King County, Surfboard, the Flood Control District. More than half of the levee was deconstructed. There was about a 1,500-foot levee, and 900 feet of that levee was taken out. It allowed that river to traverse its natural floodplain. There's about 1,000 feet, you can see it here in the blue, that blue channel, a backwater channel constructed away from the river within that floodplain to promote that rearing habitat in an area that's protected from high velocity flows. So it's a refuge place when the river is ripping. Large wood installed in the floodplain increased that diversity, and the existing levee really did prevent the river from flowing across that floodplain. It completely restricted it. So we were able to open that up and also work with the nearby farmers to improve drainage for the fields you can see on the south and the east side here. So that was really helpful. That was a win-win for agriculture as well as for fish. So now there's an additional 6.5 acres of accessible habitat and about 1.25 of new main stem habitat. That's a 32%. That's 32% of the total site. It's 3 times as a pre-project accessible aquatic area. So this is a really successful project, and it continues to show incredible success as it sort of matures. There's a flood stage photo where you can see that historic flooding there. Let's move on to the upper watershed. The Tacoma Headwaters Dam is just 3 miles downstream from Howard Hanson. It does have a working fish passage facility. You can see the diversion dam here with the adult fish ladder. It's a really impressive system. If you ever get the opportunity to go up and see it, the trap and store facility is just a fascinating thing to look at. And then upstream of the Howard Hanson, we've got about 80% intact high quality habitat that represents about 40% of the available spawning habitat in this river. It's on everyone's radar to get fish passage. It was anticipated when the plan was adopted in 2005. We're still waiting on that to happen. It does have a huge price tag. We need the Army Corps to both authorize and then appropriate that funding, and we continue to lobby. But this really, fish passage really is a singular action that could change the course of salmon recovery in the Green Duwamish. Just for context, y'all have probably heard of the Elwha Dam removal that opened up 43 miles of salmon habitat. Immediately went to use from those fish. They were immediately back in the river system. This can be up to 165 miles if you include all the tributaries in that upper watershed of habitat potential. So just an enormous win for fish in this system. Now I'll just talk about 3 projects that are still active and we're seeking funding for in the upcoming session. The first is near and dear to my heart. This is Loans Levee setback. It's in the middle green. It's poised to break ground next year. This property was purchased in 2018. It's going to include the removal of a failing levee, reconnect that with a side channel. We'll get up to 60 acres of floodplain reconnection where we're still able to protect the agricultural lands adjacent to the river. This is really a critical point in the middle green for providing that rearing habitat. So we're looking for that last piece of funding this year in the state capital budget, which will support all of the revegetation work that we're planning to do here. We'll see. This is a video of Downey. Nope. Don't think it. There we go. Can everyone see that? Hopefully, yes. Downey Farmstead is a side channel project in the city of Kent. It's about a 16-acre parcel. It's at the end of it will be a complex of side channels, so 3 entry points to the river system, starting upstream, going downstream. Lots of large wood placement, lots of riparian forest, just a really complex system in a really perfect place for fish in the lower green. This is just showing some of the construction that happened over this summer. We were able to get a drone out there. This video is far too long. We're not going to sit here and watch 7 minutes of this, but if you'd like to, I'm sure this PowerPoint is shareable. It's a cool site. If you can get down there, it's worth a visit. I'll just skip to kind of some of the places where you can see the channel here. That's going to be a main channel coming through, and then different flow rates. So the lower flow at the upstream side, higher flow at the downstream side. I'm really excited to see this project go forward. And then in our nearshore, McSorley Creek is a nearshore pocket estuary. It's at Saltwater State Park. There's about 1,000 feet of rock armor here that's going to be removed. We're going to restore, I don't know if you can see my pointer, but right where that parking lot area is a historic pocket estuary, which we've lost 99% of our pocket estuaries in the nearshore. It's going to also do an update to the park facilities, which will be really nice because this is a highly used park. We have funding to complete final design, but ultimately it's a huge project. It's going to be right around 20 million. So that's a really big lift for our sponsors, but we're hoping to get there. So bottom line, you know, I'll wrap up. Salmon are in trouble in this watershed and statewide. We have really serious and persistent problems all the way from, you know, stormwater pollution to global climate change. We have solutions that work. And if we get creative and sort of reach outside of our typical stovepipes, we can, I think, find better, more innovative ways to make more work happen to represent more of our things that we value, like salmon and protecting infrastructure and all of those good things. So I'm hoping 40 slides later that you learned all you ever wanted to know about the structure and status of salmon recovery in Washington State and what's happening here in the green Duwamish. And most importantly, you see the opportunities, and we'll seek out some opportunities for the capital projects you might be involved with to maybe work in alignment with and in support of efforts to protect, conserve, restore our natural systems for both fish and people. So I'm happy to take questions, but I also have some questions for this group because I think it would be really interesting to hear. So what matters to you in terms of making projects fish friendly? What barriers might you have faced in the past to that effort? Was it knowing who to contact, what the issues were, not knowing why it was relevant? I'd just love to hear more from you so we can help bring all this together. And of course, I'm happy to answer any questions.
So if anyone has questions or would like to comment on Suzanna's presentation, feel free to unmute yourself. Feel free to turn on your camera as well. There was one question on the chat from Homero. So Homero, if you would like to start things off and ask your questions, feel free to do that.
Okay. Yeah, this was a really good presentation, and I think this is just a comment, but I think that it's very valuable that civil engineers that are making all these projects have conversations like this with groups like yours, that it's looking into how, like, what do salmon need and what's happening to them.
So how to reach out, how to make these connections?
I mean, I think that this type, for example, this presentation today, this meeting today with civil engineers is one avenue, but I think that we can have more of this. That was not my question. My question was, where can we find more information about the organizations that you mentioned that we can contact as citizens and also as other organizations? That's the first question. The second one is, how do we measure if the projects are working? Not in terms of whether or not they are flooding or the flow rates, but how do we measure the progress in the fish populations?
Right. So I'll answer the first question, and I might punt the second question a little bit. But the organizations you can reach out to are, there are 25 lead entities in the state. So depending on where you're at, you can look on the Recreation and Conservation Office's website for lead entities in the state, and they will have all the contact information there. Certainly, please reach out to me. I just had a really great conversation with someone in King County Metro who is working on a project in one of the sites that's just adjacent to a fish passage project that's active right now with one of our partners. And it was just really enlightening for them and for us, the way that they were thinking about, what their business case constraints are, and what we might offer as far as technical support as that design develops. So that is available to any of your projects, any of your organizations. We certainly would like to be at least aware, and if appropriate, involved in those projects as they develop. And then how we measure really depends on what the question is and what the project is. There are some projects where it's a classic restoration project where we don't necessarily need to go in and electroshock a bunch of fish. We can assume that if we put in large wood, we create complex channels, we flow the flow rate, we do these elements that are known to be of benefit to fish. We tend to save our precious dollars not to fund monitoring for that work because it's so established. If we're using new innovative techniques and we really want to measure the success of those techniques, we will engage in monitoring efforts there. I would encourage you, we are just updating our monitoring and adaptive management plan. It's part of our updated salmon recovery plan. That will be out for draft next month. It articulates all of those effectiveness monitoring questions that we're asking, and also the research gaps that we still don't have answers for. So that's a really good place where the story is told about how we'd encourage folks to do base level monitoring, enhanced effectiveness monitoring, and then what sort of questions we're asking for those priority research gaps. Hopefully that's helpful.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Suzanna.
Hi, Suzanna. I have a question. My name is Catherine. Thank you so much for such a terrific presentation.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you.
I am a structural engineer. I design buildings, and so I feel that I'm pretty far removed from salmon recovery projects, but I have a personal interest in this. So I'm wondering, aside from voting in the upcoming election, how can someone like me get involved personally? How can I help make a difference in salmon recovery?
Yeah. That's a great question. And there are a lot of volunteer opportunities that come about where you can do, you can get out with other like-minded folks and do tree plantings along some of these really important riparian areas. So that's one sort of individual way. Again, yes, calling your elected officials. Honestly, the more voice we have that promotes that collective action, we need that, because there is a real thing called salmon fatigue in the legislature, and without those investments of dollars, we simply don't go forward. We can't put projects on the ground. So I would encourage you to, if you get in touch with me, I'll put you on our listserv. We always send out a lot of volunteer opportunities anytime our partners are doing something that we want to send out to the community, we'll forward that out. And then as far as your work, I still think there's a nexus there. You know, buildings produce runoff. You can think about ways to, obviously I'm outside of my expertise here, but if you can think about ways that runoff could be improved or eliminated, you know, those things still impact the environment. They're still part of the watershed. So in any way that they're that there's, you know, a nexus to the water that flows into our rivers, you have a role to play, I would argue. So yeah, please do get in touch with me. I'm happy to forward some of that information. We actually do have a project coming up with Duwamish Alive, which is one of our partners, and they have a ton of really good out on the ground, get out of your house, go look at some of these projects. They have a whole, like an itinerary for you to look at. So that's a really cool opportunity.
Thank you.
Yeah. Excuse me. Are there any other questions?
Hi, I do. My name is Lisa, and I guess I also want to address that last question. I think the responsible site design is a huge piece of it, making sure that all the stormwater is, you know, treated sufficiently, and that minimum impervious surfaces, like minimizing those things. I think that a lot of times as humans doing design, we tend to do round, pretty things which are not necessarily fitting into the natural design, the environment. And so I think that's a way that as civil engineers, we can all help to make an impact in all of our collective designs. Every little bit helps. My question to you is around the permitting of the fish recovery projects. I found I'm doing that in Snohomish County. So I'd love to collaborate sometime. And I'm finding that permitting these things, a lot of times it's like we're trying to mitigate for our salmon recovery installations, and that doesn't make any sense to me. And I'm wondering if you've heard of ways to help with that effort, like to be able to look through different lenses for these kinds of projects.
Yeah, it's a huge problem. It's almost like there's a disincentive to doing restoration work, because it is such a hurdle to get some of these permits. There are many times where, for example, on Lowndes Levee, we're going to be impacting a wetland that was created because of the levee, but is established now because of 10 years of wetland establishment. So now we have to mitigate for that wetland that we're going to impact. We're creating 60 acres of habitat, but we have to mitigate for a class 3 wetland. So it's those sorts of things where you just have to wonder if the bigger picture is being lost in permitting in some ways. I don't have a solution for this. What I can offer is some of the regional organizations, like the Salmon Recovery Council, which is an advisory body to the larger salmon region of Puget Sound Partnership, is focusing on this as a priority. So they are thinking about ways in which permitting has become an obstacle for doing good work, and trying to work alongside their cabinet agency partners, their sister agencies like Ecology, to ease that burden. Because a lot of times, you know, even just the hurdle of getting through the permit is enough to stop people from endeavoring to do the work, and that can't be what we leave it with. So there are like people focused on it.
Spending salmon recovery dollars on fighting seems so horrendous.
Right.
So, yeah.
Right.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Well, if there's no more questions, please do reach out. I would look forward to hearing from all of you if you want to have a conversation offline. I think my email is in the chat there, and certainly feel free to share my phone number and a copy of the presentation. So thank you again for having me today, and I'll turn it back over to Michelle.
Thanks, Suzanna, for your interesting presentation. I'm sure everyone also enjoyed it. And thanks everyone for joining us today. And once again, congrats to Homero on being our new ASCE Seattle section president. If you'd like to be on our mailing list, please contact us either at our email on seattleascewre@gmail.com, or you can go to our website and click on the little button to be on our mailing list. And then last thing is, as a reminder, our next meeting is on November 19th, and that'll wrap up our 2020 year. But that will be on the development of aerobic granular sludge process for biological nutrient removal. So with that, please be on the lookout for an email from us, and have a great rest of your day. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Michelle.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Ayman.
Thank you.